Good morning, everyone. My name is Bas Rodenburg. I'm from Utrecht University, and I will present the topic on poultry, on animal welfare management in organic and low-input systems. And there's data in the talk from PhD students Maeva Manet and Saskia Kliphuis, and also from master student Amy Ridderbos, all from Utrecht University. So I want to look with you at different stages. I'm focusing on laying hens for this talk because we see that behavior and welfare of laying hens can be affected by the different life phases. And it already starts with the conditions of the mother during egg laying, when she also deposits hormones in the egg. Also the conditions during incubation and around hatching. Early life conditions during the rearing period, which we call the period from 0 to 17 weeks of age. There they become adult around 20 weeks of age. Then they go to the laying farm, and also, of course, the environment at the laying farm has a large influence. Which type of things are we interested in when we think about behavior and welfare of laying hens? Well, one issue is stress sensitivity and fearfulness of flocks. Flocks that are very fearful and very sensitive to stress can also struggle from other problems. And often we see a relationship, for instance, with outbreaks of feather pecking and cannibalism. And that's the second topic that I'm focusing on. So that's the pecking of other birds, pulling out feathers of other birds. And that is a problem in all systems, and in organic systems, of course, birds have intact beaks. Beak trimming is not allowed. In conventional farms, sometimes still the tip of the beak is removed, although in some countries that's also prohibited. So I want to look with you at the different stages and show some results from previous work. This is a very crowded picture from a flock of parent stock in the Netherlands. It's from a brown parent stock, so the mother hens are white, and then you see the brown roosters in between. It looks so crowded because also this breed is very curious. So once you enter the house, they all come walking towards you, basically. That can also be a welfare issue. You can get piling and smothering. And you can also see probably that it's quite a basic floor housing system, quite a traditional floor housing system. So and sometimes they also get the impression that we don't invest so much in the parent stock of the laying hens. It's quite a simple system. We don't think of them so much, and it all starts when we get the chicks to the rearing farm. But in the project, we wanted to focus also more on this phase. So we visited 10 flocks of parent stock, and we did measurements there on feather damage and also on the stress hormone corticosterone. And then from each flock of parent stock, we followed five laying hen flocks, so from chick to adult laying hen, and we looked at risks of feather pecking throughout this production chain. And here I want to focus on this first phase. So is there a relationship between feather damage and stress in the parents and performance of the offspring? So that's something that you can see in this graph. It's a bit complicated, so I'll just explain it. The dotted lines are the white hens, and the firm lines are the brown hens. And in the white hens, we found relationships between the performance of the parents and the behavior of the offspring. And we only saw this in the white hybrid that we studied. So when we had white parent stock that already had a lot of feather damage and also high corticosterone levels, basal corticosterone levels, we found that the offspring was more likely to already develop severe feather pecking in the first week of life. And that's very alarming because this severe feather pecking, where they really damage each other, that is a behavior that they never forget again and that they will continue to show during their entire life. And this is very rare to see this in the first week of life. So that also points to the fact that we perhaps should think more about the housing conditions and the management conditions of the parent stock. Then I want to switch to incubation and hatching. So a topic that we've also explored in the PPILOW project. Eggs are normally incubated in darkness, but also in nature, hens leave the nest sometimes, and some light will be coming to the eggs. There's a nice study from Archer and Mensch in the US where they put a light sensor in the nest and they followed the natural incubation of a mother hen. You can see the picture in here below, and the bars represent the time that the mother will leave the nest, and especially towards the end of incubation, the mother leaves the nest quite frequently. And recent studies in broilers, also from Archer and his group, show very positive effects of light during incubation on broilers, that it reduces stress sensitivity and fearfulness in broilers when you use 12-hour light, 12-hour dark during incubation. And the mechanisms behind that, there are two possible mechanisms that might both play a role. One is brain lateralization, so that's you have more specialization in the brain for specific tasks, and that would make animals better able to multitask. So, for instance, keep an eye out for predators, but at the same time keep an eye out for food. And the other explanation is that this light stimulation might also lead to an earlier onset of hormonal rhythms, so corticosterone, melatonin, so the day-night rhythm, and that will sort of give a boost to the animal when it's born. The light color also plays a role. There's an older study from Rietstra and Groothuis showing that a short exposure to white light led to an increase in gentle feather pecking in young chicks. So this is not the damaging behavior, but more the social exploration. And then the group in Turkey from Sezen Özkan, they looked at different light colors. So they compared white and green light during incubation, also 12 hours light, 12 hours dark, with no light during incubation. And she also saw that with the white light there was more feather pecking compared with dark incubation, and with the green light less feather pecking. And that might be because these light colors stimulate the brain in a different way and lead to different development of the bird. So there was also a reason for us to use green light in the PPILOW project, and we studied this in a related project, the chicken stress project, where Maiva Manet is working on. We worked with brown and white strains again, and the first thing we wanted to know. These eggs are, one egg is white, one egg is brown, and this is of course a big difference when you put light to it, how much light is actually reaching the embryo. So this is something we studied first. Here you can see the light that is transmitted through the eggshell, and it's much higher for the white eggs compared to the brown eggs, as you can see. And then we also explored, is it related to eggshell thickness, which is here on the x-axis, and you can see that it's almost a flat line. So it's not because of the thickness of the eggshell, it's really because of the color of the eggshell. And it's good to realize, of course, because this might lead to much stronger effects in the white birds than in the brown birds. Then we incubated these eggs with a green light or in darkness. And then we had the birds hatching, and we wanted to know, is the light during incubation also influencing hatching results, chick quality? Well, we did not see that on chick quality. Here you see the body weights of the female chicks at hatching. The brown birds were a bit heavier than the white birds. That is common, of course. That's also throughout their lives, that stays the same. So we saw mainly differences between the two hybrids we used. The white birds hatched a bit later, but they had a better navel score, so they were already a bit further developed in a way. The brown birds were heavier, and there was less embryo mortality during late incubation. So mainly genetic differences and not so much light differences. Then we studied the brain lateralization in a small test that you can see here. Here you place the chick in front of a perspex window, and it wants to go to the other side because there's a mirror there, and behind the mirror there's its friends that are making sounds. So they want to reach the other side, and we study, do they go right or do they go left? And this is a standardized test to look at brain lateralization. And there we did see an effect where we saw that the light incubated chicks that are shown here in green, both the brown and the white, tended to were more likely to pass the obstacle on the left compared with the dark incubated chicks. Here you can see this is the zero line, so that would be equal left and right. So you can see that most animals have a preference to pass the obstacle on the left, but it's much stronger in the light incubated chicks than in the dark incubated chicks. However, we also tested their performance in another cognitive test, the whole board test, and there we did not see a difference in cognition. So it depends on the situation whether you find differences or not. Maiva, in her project, also looked at, she had these two factors, the hybrid use, so the genetics, white or brown, and the dark light effects. And she conducted many different fear and stress tests that you can see here: voluntary approach, human approach, tonic immobility, manual restraint, and a repeat of the voluntary approach. And she looked at which treatment is more fearful. And as you can probably already see from the picture, the largest difference was again in the hybrid. So the white birds tend to be more fearful than the brown birds, the bees there. And in two of the tests, there was an effect of the light treatment. It was in the expected direction. So both in the voluntary approach test and in the human approach test, the light incubated chicks were less fearful than the dark incubated chicks. So we did find some effects of the light treatment, but the largest differences were in the difference between the hybrids. And that's also relevant, of course, when you want to choose a hybrid for your farm. It's good to think about these differences between brown and white birds. So for the PPILOW project, we worked in a very similar setting. We focused only on brown birds because that's also more common in the low input and organic systems. Here you can see the birds in the incubator with the green light. And then the second treatment was enrichment after hatching. So this was the floor pen that were housed in small groups of 10 birds. And some of the groups, half of the groups, received these transparent cylinders that were filled with insect larvae from black soldier fly. And when they kicked these around and pecked at these, there were small holes in the tubes, and these insects would fall out and they can eat the insects. They really like insect enrichment, so they were really active, also pursuing these tubes and looking for the insects. So we had 4 treatments there: light dark schedule without larvae, light dark with larvae, dark with larvae, and dark without larvae. And also Saskia performed many different tests with the birds. You can see the summary over here. I will not go into detail, of course, in all these tests. The first round was also wounded a little bit by the COVID crisis, where we had limited access to the farm. But in the second round, more tests were possible. A test that I want to show briefly something about is the fear of humans test. So this again, this voluntary approach test that also Maiva found effects, where you are the observer is in an arena with a bird, offering some attractive food and then measuring how long it takes until the bird eats the food or approaches the observer. And there we saw that the light incubated birds, so that's the purple line and the blue line, were quicker to approach the human than the dark incubated birds. And this effect seemed to be strongest in the light birds that also received the larvae, but this difference was not significant for the treatment specifically, but it was for the specific light treatments. So it was about 1.3 times faster than the dark incubated chicks. However, I showed you we had a large test battery of fear tests and we did not find differences in the other fear tests, so that's important to keep in mind. Of course, this is also quite a small-scale setting with small groups of 10 birds, so in general, also the behavior, they were quite relaxed, it was quite a good environment, and that's always challenging when doing experimental work compared with on-farm work. We also studied feather pecking, but we had very low levels of feather pecking. So here you see the gentle feather pecking in the dark and the light, and the green is the no larvae, the yellow the larvae. There were no significant differences in gentle feather pecking. We hardly saw any severe feather pecking. You see here the birds aging, so we studied them during the rearing period from 0 to 17 weeks. And we did find a difference between the rounds, so in one round there was more feather pecking than in the other. And that also resulted in a difference in feather damage. So this is the feather score, and the bluer purple, the score is the more damage was found. So in the first round we had a little more damage than in the second round. when it was mainly zeros and 1. But no effect of the treatments on feather damage. And here you can see the detailed scoring. We use the Bielczyk and Keeling method. We also studied foraging behavior, and we were expecting that by giving the birds, half of the birds, these insect larvae, this would affect foraging. And indeed we saw that the larvae-enriched groups foraged more often, 1.2 times more often than the birds that did not have the enrichment, although the total foraging time was not significantly different between the groups. So for this experimental work, we saw that the effects of light during incubation were not as strong as we expected. They seemed stronger in broilers so far than in laying hens. We saw positive effects on brain lateralization and on fear of humans, but no effects in other fear tests. We saw the comparison between the white and the brown strains, where you see that they are very different if you test their fearfulness. That can be useful for practice. And we saw that the environmental enrichment with insect larvae stimulates foraging in pullets and could help to reduce the risk of feather packing. I want to go back to the story I started with the on-farm assessment of feather packing in the different life stages. So we saw this relationship between the parent stock and the chick starting feather packing. And then we followed these rearing flocks until the laying farm. And something interesting that we saw there in the PhD research of Elske de Haas was that if you, we visited them at 1 week of age, 5 weeks of age, and 10 weeks of age on all those different rearing farms. And we saw a clear peak in feather packing, both in gentle feather packing and in severe feather packing around week 5 of rearing. And this was mainly in conventional flocks, so in indoor aviary barns, as you can see here. And here the birds are confined in the aviary rows until about 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 weeks, and then set free in the system. And we saw that many of the flocks that showed severe feather packing and that already developed damage around this age, around 5 weeks of age, were also flocks that did not have access to any litter. So you can do this by placing chick paper in the system, that some litter accumulates there. Of course, also when the system opens, there's litter offered on the floor. But 70% of the flocks that had damage early on in the rearing period had problems with litter supply. And what was interesting to see that here, I showed you before with the maternal stress, it was mainly the white birds that were affected. With the environmental stimulation, it was mainly the brown birds that were affected. So again, this difference in the hybrids is really strong. And so here you see the litter limitation. So birds that had no or poor access to litter, no limitation. The blue bars are the white birds. Those were hardly affected. But the red bars, the brown birds, were strongly affected by litter deprivation. So they really need access to stimulating materials. Then in the end, we also visited the laying hen farm at 40 weeks of age. And we again looked at feather damage during lay and related this back to all the stages before that. And then we studied which factors are influencing feather damage on the laying farm at 40 weeks of age. And then we saw indeed that the rearing period mattered for the performance of the laying hen flock. So birds that already show severe feather packing at 5 weeks of age, it's almost guaranteed that they will continue to do that and they will have a lot of damage already at 40 weeks of age. Also, fearfulness of humans. A simple fear test where you stand in the barn and measure, do the birds approach me and how fast do they approach me, was also informative and predictive of feather damage later in life. So that's also something practical you can use. And then we also found some factors on the laying farm itself that influenced feather damage. We saw more feather damage in floor housing than in aviary housing. We saw more damage in large group sizes. We saw more damage in groups in flocks that were very fearful of humans, but that can be cause and effect, of course. And we also saw more damage in flocks that did not have modified management. And what is modified management? You can see some examples here on the right. So things like providing alfalfa bales or other forms of roughage, having a radio playing in the house to get the birds accustomed to human voices and to music and to something happening in the barn. Also packing blocks. And so the farmers that used measures like this were less likely to have problems. And so again, we saw those differences between white and brown strain, where the white seemed more sensitive to the stress and the fearfulness side of things, and the brown seemed to be more sensitive to a poor environment, absence of litter, lack of stimulation. We also saw that good human-animal relationships are important, and in combination with the stimulating environment. So think about litter access and environmental enrichment. And the simple fear test that I described, it can provide already a simple indicator of how likely is this flock to develop feather packing later in life. Finally, I want to show you something from a small collaboration with Dutch farmers that work with mobile houses like this. During avian influenza, the birds were not allowed to go into the free range. So they had to be restricted to the house. And in most cases, there was a covered veranda constructed around the house to still give the birds some more space and more access and enrichment, but then under a roof so that they could be safe from the avian influenza. And then Amy Ridderbos, the master student, she visited 4 different farms with 2 different types of mobile houses. Here you can see was the wrong one, the outside, and here the inside of the mobile house. And she had 2 farms with a commercial layer hybrid, so like the ones that I just showed the results from, and also 2 farms with a dual purpose hybrid, so that's a chicken that can both produce eggs and also grow fast enough for slaughter. So the males are typically slaughtered for meat, and the females produce eggs. And there was also between the 4 farms some variation in quality of environmental enrichment. In one case it was only a hay bale in the covered veranda, and in the other farms there was more variation and more stimulation. So she observed feather packing and also feather loss and plumage damage in those 4 flocks. And she saw more feather packing in especially one of the laying hybrid flocks, H1, and this flock also had by far the most feather loss and feather damage. Here you see the dual purpose flocks. One of the cases there was some feather damage, in the other there was no feather damage. And this H1 flock also stood out a bit because in all cases it had the most negative results, and it also had the poorest environmental enrichment, so that seem to be connected to that result. Also in previous scientific studies, this difference in the risk of feather packing between normal laying hybrids and the dual purpose hybrid has been found. This is a study from Mona Giersberg comparing the Lohmann Brown and the Lohmann Dual. The Lohmann Dual is also a dual purpose strain that's already on the market. And here you can see the development of feather damage in the laying hen genetics and in the dual purpose. So that's really a huge difference in feather packing risk. So back to the 4 farms that I was talking about for the student project. She also observed that the dual purpose flocks in blue here showed much more normal foraging behavior than the commercial laying hybrids, both during the morning on the left, the afternoon and the evening. So they were very active, but they were really engaged with their environment and not so much with other birds. And this also applied to preening. And then we also looked at fearfulness, so how many birds are approaching the novel object. And then you can see in orange the laying hybrid, and here the 2 dual purpose. So also in fearfulness, the dual purpose birds were less fearful of a novel object and were more likely to approach the novel object. So if we look at the on-farm observations, during the avian influenza outbreak, we saw that this addition of a covered veranda was really useful to still allow the birds to show some foraging and to have some extra space available. It really helps to prevent feather packing. We also saw that in the experiment itself, because the birds that I talked about for the experiment in Utrecht later went to ILVO for the free range phase, and there we also had one batch without covered veranda and one with, and we saw exactly the same. So much less feather packing with this covered veranda. It's clear that good quality environmental enrichment is important, so things like alfalfa bales, fresh greens, hay, straw, packing blocks, some variation. And it's clear that these dual-purpose birds seem less at risk to develop feather packing and show more normal foraging behavior, less fearful, so it could be a real opportunity, especially for small-scale producers. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
According to the results with the light intensity and light color, do you think it's a promising approach to reduce feather packing and other stress-related behaviors?
There has been some, it's still working, there have been some studies that found encouraging results, especially also from the Turkey group from Sezen Özkan, where green light helped to reduce feather packing. I think it would be good to study it in a bit more sort of environments with a bit more pressure. So maybe like commercial environment, or because I think with the experimental studies with the small groups, it's often very difficult to mimic things that you see in practice. So, and there is quite a lot of interest also from hatcheries to think about light during incubation, also reducing noise during incubation. Noise around hatching is a huge stressor for chicks. Of course, you have developments also in on-farm hatching. In the broilers, it's already quite common. In the laying hens, people are starting to think about it. So I think there's a number of possibilities you have during incubation, and it's a relatively simple innovation. But in our case, we were hoping for stronger effects of the light during incubation. Yeah.
Are you also looking at toe packing in your birds? Because this is also an issue that I've seen more and more come up, especially in the white birds.
That's a good question. We did not include it, and we also did not see it in our experiments. Of course, for the PPILOW experiments, they were all brown birds, and it's mainly an issue in the white birds. In the white birds, in Maiva's experiment, we also did not see toe packing, but then it is quite a spacious and nice environment. We do hear it from the field a lot. So, and for instance, there's a project in Switzerland at the moment on toe packing. We did not include it. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Thank you for sharing such interesting results. My question is, why assessing the green light in specific?
Yeah, so that was based on the previous studies, mainly from Sezen Özkan, where she saw negative effects of white light on feather packing specifically, and positive effects of green light. And she has also been digging more into the mechanisms, and it could be because it stimulates the brain in a different way. Also the serotonergic and dopaminergic system can be affected differently by different light colors. But we're still also digging into the mechanism, and they are continuing research in this area. Yeah.
Thank you. And please, do you measure the cortisol in blood or in feather?
In this case, it was in blood. Currently, we also do a lot of assessment in feathers. And also for the PPILOW project and for the chicken stress project, we have results on feather corticosterone. And the nice thing about that is, of course, it's a longer time period that is recorded, basically. So you don't need an acute stressor to look at the HPA axis reactivity, but you really can look at those 20 weeks. Do you see a difference between treatments or between farms? Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Bas, do you have an idea of the characteristic of veranda? So veranda is always very open, or do you think that veranda should be designed in a definite way? So covered, light, I don't know.
Yeah. I think it is important for the birds to be able to get fresh air and a bit of an outdoor experience, but at the same time you want it bird-proof, that it's not wild birds coming into the veranda for the avian influenza risk. The most common that we have, for instance, in the Netherlands is a bit similar to the pigs, for the pigs that Charlotte showed, like a concrete floor and a roof over it, and then bird-proof netting around it, litter on the floor, and enrichment that are offered there. That's the most common, but there's quite some variation. And also with the small-scale producers, we're also working with them to look at how high should the veranda be, what type of materials can you offer. Some also include perches or trees or branches to make it a bit more.
Because probably in the future we will have a precise idea
Yeah,
of the problem
yeah.
of influenza to design such veranda, because anyway, so concrete or not, litter or not, probably we have to define better.
Yeah, and of course it's different for a mobile house compared to a fixed house. Yeah.
Thank you. It's just a curiosity. Do you think that this kind of light, or it's affecting the behavior? So it will affect the overall growth or maybe litter quality, because you were talking about having different two types of systems, housing systems. So it will affect the quality of litter or maybe behavior, like sometimes the bird trying to fight with each other or something like that.
The light, you mean?
Overall light, and then this kind of house in veranda.
All right. It can help, of course, because usually part of the birds will go into the veranda, so there's a better distribution of birds. It could also have a better litter quality then, because there's more ventilation, there's more movement, there's more activity. So in general, we mainly see positive effects of the veranda. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Last question. The mobile house system, where you compare like the white hens with like little purpose hens, big difference between them is the presence of roosters in the system, right? Did you, one picture you show a farm, right?
Yeah.
Is that taken into account in the research? So like a difference with roosters being present in the systems?
I would have to look that up, to be honest. She did not mention it in the report, so I can check and get back to you.
Okay, good.